Welcome to Starting Broke, a 12-month plan to build stability, income, and control. This is part one of the series. If this could help someone you know, share it with them. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell to get the next parts weekly. Let's begin. Introduction. Welcome to Frogplum Audiobooks. This channel exists to help people think clearly, make better decisions, and build stability in their work and financial lives. Our primary focus is business thinking, execution, discipline, income, and long-term sustainability. Self-improvement appears here only when it directly supports those outcomes. Before we begin, an important clarification. This audiobook is for educational purposes only. It is not business advice, financial advice, legal advice, or investment advice. The ideas discussed here are general frameworks, not personalized recommendations. Outcomes depend on individual circumstances, execution, risk tolerance, and local regulations. You are responsible for your own decisions, and when appropriate, you should consult qualified professionals. That disclaimer is not here to be dramatic. It is here because responsible thinking starts with acknowledging uncertainty. In real business environments, there are no guarantees. Anyone who suggests otherwise is not operating in reality. Now, what is Frogplum Audiobooks specifically? We work from two sources only. First, real operating experience. I have built and run businesses in the tech industry under real constraints, limited capital, cash flow pressure, long timelines, uncertainty, and responsibility for outcomes. That background shapes how ideas are filtered here. Not everything that sounds good survives contact with real-world execution. Second, we study established books that have proven useful over time. In this audiobook, the concepts align with well-known works in money, behavior, and execution. We name those books openly. We do not quote them, idolize them, or treat them as doctrine. We extract what is practical, testable, and compatible with business reality. This channel does not exist to motivate you emotionally. Motivation fades, systems endure. This audiobook is built around a simple but often ignored truth. Most people do not fail because they lack ambition, intelligence, or effort. They fail because their system is unstable. When income is volatile, expenses are rigid, and buffers are thin, people are forced into reactive decision-making. Short-term fixes crowd out long-term plans. Planning feels pointless because emergencies keep interrupting. Optimism replaces structure. This audiobook is designed to break that loop. It presents a rolling 12-month operating framework. You can start it in any month of the year. There is no perfect time. There is only the moment you decide to stop improvising and start operating with intent. We will not say January, New Year, or fresh start. We will say month 1, the first 30 days, the middle phase, the final quarter. This matters because waiting for a calendar reset is one of the most common forms of avoidance. The framework you are about to hear follows 3 stages. 1. Stabilize the system. 2. Increase earning power. 3. Build safety and optionality. These stages are sequenced on purpose. We do not chase growth before stability. We do not invest before cash flow control. We do not add complexity before execution discipline. Progress will be measured using business-relevant indicators, not feelings. Net monthly cash flow, fixed cost load, financial runway, hourly earning value, consistency of execution. At the end of each chapter, you will hear a short micro-practice. These are not mindset exercises. They are small, concrete actions designed to be completed within 24 hours. Action creates clarity. Clarity reduces friction. Part 1 focuses on stabilization. This is the least exciting part of the process, and it is the part most people skip. That is why they stay stuck. Stability is not about punishment. Stability is about control. Control is what allows better decisions to compound over time. When you are ready, we will move into Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Volatility is the real emergency. Before we begin, a short reminder. This audiobook presents an educational framework. It is not business advice, financial advice, legal advice, or investment advice. Apply the ideas responsibly and within your own circumstances. Let's start with the real problem most people misunderstand. Definition. Volatility is when small problems create outsized damage because your system has no buffer. When people say they are broke or behind, they usually focus on income. But in practice, income is not the first failure point. Volatility is. In business, this distinction is obvious. A small company with modest revenue but predictable cash flow can survive for years. A company with higher revenue but unpredictable cash flow often collapses suddenly, not because it lacks customers, but because one missed payment, one delayed invoice, or one unexpected expense triggers a chain reaction. The same thing happens to individuals. You can earn a reasonable salary and still be fragile. You can earn less and be stable. The difference is not effort, it is structure. Here is a common real-world scenario. Someone earns decent money, but their expenses are rigid. Rent is high, payments are stacked, there is no margin. When something minor happens, a car repair, a medical bill, a temporary reduction in hours, the response is not calm problem solving. The response is urgency. Urgency leads to bad decisions. People take on high-interest debt. They sell assets at the wrong time. They accept work that pays fast but damages long-term earning power. They stop planning entirely because everything feels like firefighting. This is not a discipline issue. It is a volatility issue. In the psychology of money, one of the core ideas is that behavior under uncertainty determines outcomes. Translate that into operational language, and the lesson becomes practical. Avoid systems where one surprise can knock you out of the game. Volatility changes how people think. When you are exposed, every decision feels time-sensitive. You choose speed over quality. You grab relief instead of building structure. You postpone important tasks because the day feels chaotic. You see this clearly in struggling businesses. Leaders stop reviewing numbers because they already know they are bad. Planning meetings get canceled because there is no time. Short-term wins are prioritized, even if they create long-term damage. Optimism replaces process. At the personal level, the pattern is identical. People avoid checking accounts. They delay budgeting. They tell themselves things will stabilize next month. Meanwhile, the system remains fragile. This is why working harder does not automatically fix the problem. Effort applied inside a volatile system leaks away. Every step forward is absorbed by the instability. Progress does not compound, it resets. That is why the first objective of this audiobook is not growth, it is stability. Stability means your basic operating needs are covered. Housing, food, transportation, minimum obligations. It means that when something unexpected happens, it is inconvenient, not catastrophic. In business turnarounds, experienced operators always follow the same sequence. They stabilize cash flow. They reduce fixed obligations. They simplify decisions. They stop unnecessary risk. Only after stability returns do they pursue expansion. Trying to grow before stabilizing is not ambitious. It is reckless. Here is the rule we will follow throughout this framework. You are not trying to feel better. You are trying to reduce fragility. When fragility drops, decision quality improves automatically. You stop making choices from fear. You stop reacting. You regain the ability to think ahead. This is not about perfection. It is about reducing exposure. Once exposure is reduced, effort starts to matter again. That is the foundation. Everything else builds on this. Micro-practice, the stability snapshot. Do this within 24 hours. Write down the following 5 numbers on one page. 1. Your average monthly income. 2. Your total fixed costs. 3. Your average variable costs. 4. Your minimum survival number. 5. Your current financial runway in months. Do not optimize. Do not judge. This is data collection, not self-criticism. In business, clarity precedes control. The same rule applies here. Chapter 2. Stop the bleeding. Fixed costs kill optionality. Now let's move to the first concrete action in stabilizing your system. Definition. Stopping the bleeding means reducing the fixed obligations that quietly remove your ability to choose. When people try to regain control of their finances, they usually focus on small expenses, coffee, eating out, minor subscriptions. Those cuts feel productive, but they rarely change the outcome. What actually determines whether you are trapped or flexible is your fixed cost load. Fixed costs are expenses that show up every month regardless of how well things are going. Rent, car payments, insurance, long-term contracts, minimum debt payments. These costs do not care if income drops or emergencies appear. In business, fixed costs are treated with extreme caution. A company with high fixed overhead loses flexibility. When revenue dips, leadership panics. Decisions get rushed. Bad contracts get signed. Good people get burned out. Eventually, one shock becomes fatal. At the individual level, the same mechanics apply. Here is a common real-world pattern. Someone earns a decent income. On paper, things look fine, but most of that income is already spoken for. Housing takes a large share. Transportation is locked in. Payments are stacked. There is no margin. As long as nothing goes wrong, the system appears stable. But when a small disruption hits, reduced hours, a medical expense, a family obligation, the system does not bend, it snaps. The response is urgency. Urgency creates bad decisions. People take on high-interest debt to bridge gaps. They sell assets under pressure. They accept work that pays fast but damages long-term earning power. They postpone planning because survival feels more important. This is not a discipline problem. It is a structural one. This is why serious operators focus on fixed costs early. In The Millionaire Next Door, one consistent finding is that many financially stable people live below what their income could technically support. Not because they lack ambition, but because lower fixed costs protect optionality. Optionality is the ability to say no. No to bad jobs. No to predatory loans. No to panic decisions. No to commitments you cannot sustain. When fixed costs are high, you lose that ability. Stopping the bleeding does not mean deprivation forever. It means creating breathing room now. The mistake people make is treating current commitments as permanent. They defend them because they already exist. But in business turnarounds, nothing is sacred if it threatens survival. Leaders renegotiate leases. They pause projects. They cut non-essential contracts. They simplify operations. Pride does not enter the decision. We will apply the same logic here. For a limited stabilization period, every expense is classified, not justified. There are 3 categories only. 1. Essential. Without this, basic function breaks. 2. Pausable. Useful, but not necessary right now. 3. Replaceable. Necessary, but cheaper alternatives exist. This is not about cutting everything. It is about lowering the baseline pressure that forces bad decisions. A responsibility note. Do not create new risks to reduce costs. Unsafe housing, unsafe transportation, legal exposure, or health risks undermine stability. The goal is control, not chaos. When fixed costs drop, something important happens. Time pressure reduces. Decision quality improves. Planning becomes possible again. You stop reacting and start choosing. That is what stopping the bleeding actually means. Micro practice. The fixed cost cut list. Do this within 24 hours. On one page, list every recurring monthly expense. Then do the following. 1. Cancel or pause at least one non-essential recurring expense today. 2. Identify your single largest fixed cost. Write one realistic way to reduce it within the next 90 days. 3. Set a rule. No new recurring commitments until stability improves. This will not solve everything immediately. It changes trajectory. In business, reducing fixed costs buys time. Time is leverage. Chapter 3. Cash Clarity. Turn anxiety into data. Now we move to the most avoided step in stabilization. Definition. Cash clarity means turning uncertainty and anxiety into visible, usable information. Most people do not fail financially because they lack effort. They fail because they operate blind. In business, running blind is unacceptable. Leaders review cash flow constantly, not because it is exciting, but because cash flow determines survival. You can have a great product and strong demand, but if the numbers are unclear, decisions degrade quickly. At the individual level, the avoidance pattern is familiar. People avoid checking accounts. They delay opening statements. They guess instead of knowing. Not because they are irresponsible, but because the numbers trigger stress. Unfortunately, avoidance increases volatility. Here is a common, real-world scenario. Someone knows things are tight, but they cannot explain exactly why. They know money leaves faster than it comes in, but they do not know where the pressure points are. When a decision comes up, a purchase, a job change, a risk, They rely on feeling instead of facts. That is how small mistakes become expensive ones. In struggling companies, you see the same pattern. Leadership stops reviewing reports because they already know the situation is bad. Meetings become vague. Language shifts from numbers to narratives. Hope replaces analysis. That is when collapse accelerates. Cash clarity reverses this process. Cash clarity does not mean complex budgeting. It means knowing, at any moment, 3 things. 1. How much comes in? 2. How much must go out? 3. What happens if income drops temporarily? This is not about optimization. It is about control. Once numbers are visible, anxiety often drops. Not because the situation is suddenly good, but because uncertainty is reduced. You stop imagining worst-case scenarios and start dealing with reality. This is a critical shift. Anxiety thrives on ambiguity. Decision-making improves with clarity. One reason people resist cash clarity is fear of judgment. They think the numbers say something about their character. In business, numbers are not moral statements. They are diagnostic tools. A company does not feel ashamed of a weak balance sheet. It adjusts operations. We will apply the same mindset here. Cash clarity is not about blaming the past. It is about creating a baseline from which improvement is possible. You cannot reduce volatility if you do not know where it originates. You cannot lower fixed costs if you do not know which ones dominate. You cannot plan income growth if you do not know your true baseline. This is why cash clarity comes after stopping the bleeding, but before increasing income. There is another important benefit. Once you have clarity, decision fatigue drops. You stop renegotiating the same questions every day. You stop guessing. You stop reacting. Your system becomes predictable enough to plan. That is when effort starts to compound. Cash clarity turns emotion into information. Information restores control. Micro practice, the one-page cash map. Do this within 24 hours. On one page, create 3 sections. Section 1, inflows. List every source of income. Be honest, use averages. Section 2, outflows. List all fixed costs first, then variable costs. Section 3, pressure points. Answer 3 questions. What expense creates the most stress? What income source is least reliable? How many months could you operate if income dropped? Do not optimize yet. This is visibility, not strategy. In business, clarity precedes planning. The same rule applies here. Chapter 4, Stability Rules. What you freeze, what you protect. Now we lock stability in. Definition. Stability rules are simple, pre-decided constraints that prevent you from making the problem worse while you are fixing it. In business turnarounds, leaders do not rely on willpower. They install rules. They freeze hiring. They pause expansions. They delay non-essential projects. They require approval for spending above a threshold. These rules are not permanent. They exist to protect the system during recovery. At the individual level, the same approach works. Here is the mistake most people make. They identify problems correctly. They cut some expenses. They gain clarity. Then they slowly drift back into old behavior. One exception becomes 2. One small commitment becomes permanent. Pressure builds again. This is not a motivation issue. It is a missing rule issue. When decisions are made repeatedly, fatigue sets in. Fatigue leads to inconsistency. Inconsistency recreates volatility. Stability rules remove repeated decisions. There are 3 categories of rules you need during stabilization. First, freeze rules. Freeze rules stop new damage. Examples: no new recurring payments, no new debt obligations, no long-term commitments without a waiting period. In business, freezes buy time. Time allows analysis. Analysis improves outcomes. Second, protection rules. Protection rules guard what keeps the system alive. Examples: minimum cash buffer is not touched except for true emergencies. Rent, food, and transport are prioritized above everything else. Income-producing tools and skills are protected. These rules ensure survival inputs remain intact. Third, simplification rules. Simplification rules reduce cognitive load. Examples: 1 primary account for spending, 1 review day per week for finances, 1 active improvement focus at a time. Complex systems break under stress. Simple systems hold. Why this works. Rules shift behavior from emotional to operational. You stop asking, "Can I afford this?" The rule already answered that question. You stop negotiating with yourself. Negotiation invites exceptions. In business, this is how discipline scales. Systems enforce what intentions cannot. A responsibility note. Stability rules are temporary. They are not meant to shrink your life permanently. They exist to create a safe window for rebuilding. The danger is not rules. The danger is drifting without them. Once stability improves, rules can be adjusted deliberately. But during recovery, flexibility without structure is risk. Here is the shift that happens when stability rules are in place. Stress drops because decisions drop. Consistency increases because friction drops. Progress holds because regression is blocked. You stop undoing your own work. That is what stability actually looks like in practice. Micro-practice. Your 3 stability rules. Do this within 24 hours. Write down 3 rules, 1 sentence each. 1 freeze rule example. No new recurring expenses until my runway improves. 2 protection rule example. My emergency cash is only for true disruptions, not convenience. 3. 1 simplification rule example. I review finances once a week, not every day. Post these rules somewhere visible. They replace willpower with structure. In business, rules protect recovery. The same is true here. Thank you for listening to Starting Broke, Part 1. If you know someone who needs this, share it with them. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell to follow the rest of the series, with new parts released weekly.